Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominic and Brian.
One of the most amazing things that Brian and I have experienced as soon as we started speaking to men about taking the inner journey is how many women have so generously stepped up to offer their support, guidance, and wisdom in helping us along that path. And so recently, Brian and I decided to run our 7th Discerning Dick Sexual Wisdom for the Modern Man event here in New York City. It's a live event series. And this was the first time that we had women take the stage and guide us through some of the things that we wanted to know about building intimacy in new relationships, how to keep the flame going in long-term relationships, and how do you slide into someone's DMs in a way that you stand out much more than the other guys. And the women who shared their stories stepped up in such a powerful way that we felt that we wanted to bring this into a podcast form so that you could benefit from it as well, because we know that so many of you are not able to ever get here to New York City to attend one of these events live and in person. So in this episode today, we've downloaded the greatest hits from our most recent Discerning Dick event, Women Teach Men. Brian, guys have been asking us a lot of questions that you and I just are ill-equipped to providing answers to.
We do not have all the answers.
We don't have all the answers. Some of the big ones that keep coming up, especially with single guys, is how do I approach women in this Me Too era? How do I initiate? How do I court in a way that feels good for both sides? Because men have started to express this exasperation around, I really don't think that women know what they want. Yeah. They want us to be the ones who are persistent in an initiative, to take initiative, but at the same time, it's like, how far is too far?
Yeah, how far is too far? And I'm terrified if I cross that line unknowingly. Right. So therefore, maybe I'm just not going to do anything.
I will take myself out of the running altogether. And then women have expressed that there's a problem with that, obviously. Married men, either married or in long-term relationships, have expressed to us, hey, I've had children with my wife, and as soon as that's happened, my wife is no longer interested in having sex anymore. And so that's just a thing that happens. And then other men will say to us, yeah, well, biologically, we're men. We're designed to have bigger needs sexually than our women do. And therefore, I'm always going to want to have more sex than my wife or my long-term girlfriend. And what you and I have found in talking to all of the women who are very interested in helping us to translate their messages for the men in our community is that none of that is the truth. None of that.
So what is the truth? Because the advice that I've been getting is, hey, Brian, if you want to continue to have sex, don't get married. And I've had that over many years, and many people tell me that. So like, what's up? If women saying this is not true, what's up?
Yeah. That's sage advice from like really unhappily married men at the age of 45, 50. Don't take their advice. We went to the experts themselves, the women in our community. And so last week, it was our 7th Discerning Dick Sexual Wisdom for the Modern Man live event in New York City. But it was the first time that we opened our stages to women teaching us as men to answer some of these questions. And in advance of that event, we did a lot of our own research, right? We went onto a couple of online forums on Facebook that are communities of men and women about relationships and sexuality. We'll name 2 of them where we ended up polling a lot of people. So the first one is the Kaleidoscope. The second one is Leveled Up Love. You could probably search those on Facebook. And we went on and just asked the question of, to the women, what do you want men to know about these kinds of questions? And we got some amazing feedback. We solicited some women that were in our circles to say, hey, would you be willing to speak and share your stories in front of us? And out of all the advice that we got, and we'll share a bunch of that, it really distilled down to these 2 things that women want that if we are able to provide them, that desire, lust, intimacy, sex, connection, all explode.
Just 2, Dom.
Just 2.
Really?
Very simple. Yes.
I don't know if I actually believe that.
Well, we'll unpack that, right? And I find it hard to believe too, but when we ask the questions, it really seemed to hover around these 2 things. The hard part, though, is that these seem to be 2 sides of the same coin. It's like paradoxical. What women are looking for, safety and a spark. Those are the 2 things, safety and a spark. And those can sometimes seem at odds because it's like what creates safety for a woman oftentimes doesn't feel like there's a spark that's involved there.
Yeah, it sounds like the old good guys finish last, or I want a bad boy, but that's not safe. Is he marriage material or is he just sex material, right? Like, I feel like that's the paradox in another nutshell.
Yeah. So instead of looking at these as like a binary, mutually exclusive thing, right? Either I have the bad boy or I have the boring good guy. It's more like the yin and the yang, right? It's like, how do you create this interwoven mix of just enough of each? Because if you're not understanding it, it can sound a lot like a woman is confused and she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's being like hypocritical or she's being confusing. But if you really attune your senses to this, and what we found is that men really need to refine their craft around creating conditions where a woman feels safe and refining his craft around where a woman can feel a spark. Once you hit that, women respond.
Yep.
Here's a quote that we got from one of the women in the Kaleidoscope. She said this is Kelly. When a man has no expectation of an outcome to our sexual encounters, I feel safe to relax into the moment. When he takes his time to explore and learn how to get me into full turn-on mode, I feel safe to surrender my being to him and to the pleasure. This type of conscious connection makes me feel on top of the fucking world, and I would probably do most anything for that conscious, badass man. To my understanding, Kelly is a woman who is single now but has also been married, so is drawing upon real experiences from both of those periods of time in her life. And if you unpack that, it can sound like a paradox. When a man has no expectation of an outcome to our sexual encounters, every man has an expectation to a sexual encounter. Is your agenda so heavy-handed where it feels like it's self-centered to the point where like her needs and her desires aren't even considered? Well, then, of course, it feels like an expectation that maybe pushes her away, makes her feel unsafe, makes it feel like she's not even a part of the co-creation, right?
And as a guy, it's like, well, then what do I do? Do I fake it? If my agenda is I want to have sex, do I just pretend that I don't?
Yeah.
And that can very easily go in the opposite direction of the safety, but not the spark.
Exactly. And let's confuse you a little bit further before we clarify, because I think like...
And as a guy, Dominic, when I hear quotes like this, it's very easy to eject and just say, look, like women don't know what they want. They're crazy. And all I can do is me.
Yeah.
And what I'm excited about with this podcast, I know what we got coming up here is the craft or the tools can help solve this stuff, the safety and the spark at one time.
Absolutely.
Which is exciting. We'll get there.
We have four very specific ways that you can create both a safety and a spark inside of your relationships, and also to identify some of those areas where you go wrong in your relationships that create this sense of feeling lostness and confusion. Here's another paradox for you. One of the women who spoke at our event, let's call her Dolores, she said that I want a man to be completely overwhelmed by his lust and his desire for me. I want him to be weak in the knees. I want him to like lose complete focus and control on what he's doing because I'm the object of his desire. And at the same time, if that goes too far, then he becomes weak and needy and chaotic. And I don't trust him because like if he's willing to give up his entire life and all of his focus and attention for just me, how stable and how sturdy is he for when I need to be chaotic and so it sounds like yet again that there's a paradox here.
To rephrase that one, it's want me, come after me with desire, but not right now.
Yeah.
Or not too much.
Yeah, but with restraint and with like, how do you get there? And so this seems on the surface until you get really refined around the craft of understanding a language of a woman, it can seem like a paradox, like they don't know what they're, but in actuality, they're very clear. And we found this out in having spoken to many women. This conversation around persistence. Men are rewarded universally for demonstrating and embodying this characteristic of taking initiative and being persistent. This is not just with like women. This is also in, say, business. Women have said to us many times, I love a man who will not be turned down after his purpose. He could be shot down, beaten to the ground. He'll get up off the mat and he will make sure that whatever happens, like he either is there to make sure that his business is successful or that his family's protected. His persistence and his vigilance is such an attraction. And also, when courting a woman, persistence can be attractive and a turn on to a point. One of the women who spoke to us on our stage last week also said, hey, if you reach out to me in my direct messages and my DMs and I've ignored you 3 times, go away. Like, I'm clearly not
interested. 3 is the limit.
3 is the limit.
And I think it's fair to Dom say in marriages too, we heard that element of persistence and like, let's have sex, let's have sex. Yeah.
And what the problem is with that, one of my friends, he's a lawyer. His name is John. He's brilliant. He's hilarious. He's like, persistence is necessary, but not sufficient. Persistence in the absence of awareness, in the absence of tact, in the absence of mindfulness and presence with the other person.
Being able to read the situation.
Exactly. Then it's not sufficient. So you can't just be a bull in a china shop. The magic number for reaching out to a woman may not be 3 times. It may be once. It may be 7 times. Who knows? It could be different, but you need to have an attunement. So what we're talking about right now is if you can set aside a bit of the confusion and frustration that we have both felt ourselves, where it seems like 2 different things are being asked for, and really listen to what women want, which is creating safety and spark for them, then we can get to some very specific ways in which we've seen women respond extremely well to these things.
And Dominic, the spark piece, just to clarify that, I think safety we at least have a general sense for. But spark is that, in other words, an aliveness. Being in the moment of being able to read me, I read you. It's the opposite of us running our programs.
Yes.
Dominic, I know you and I have talked about this. I had a conversation with a friend recently. He was in a conversation with a woman at some sort of event. They're talking. They're totally engaged. They're hitting it off. So he goes in for the kiss, right? And when he does that, she stops him mid-kiss. And
so she did accept the kiss.
She accepted the kiss. They were kissing. They're mid-kiss. And she stopped at mid-kiss. And she said, what was that? He's like, well, what are you talking about? She's like, I didn't feel anything from you there. She's like, when we're talking, I feel totally engaged. But when we kissed, I didn't feel anything. He's like, oh, well, that sucks. Like, maybe we should just keep talking.
Yeah.
So they continue the conversation. The conversation was going great. So a little bit later in the night, he goes in for kiss number 2. Very persistent. Right? Yeah. Goes in for the kiss. She accepts. And they're kissing consensually. And she stops it again. And she said, when you're talking to me, I feel like you're talking to me. When you're kissing me, I feel like you're kissing someone else. Yeah. And through that conversation, what he realized is that he had been running a program. And that was his kissing program. Now, he had learned that program over a series of experiences in his life. He knows what he knows, and that's a good kisser. I think we often don't think about is that these programs that we run, whether it's the kissing program or the dating program, I'm going to come in and ask 10 questions, right? Or the sex program, because this is how I've always had sex. There's not that aliveness to it because it's the same no matter who's in front of us.
Totally.
And so an example of this spark is simply like, are we running the program that we know and that we're comfortable with and has maybe even worked in the past? Or are we reading the situation in the moment to create that aliveness, to feel it? The analogy that I give is it's almost like if you're a surfer and ignoring waves.
Right.
And you're like, I'm going to get from point A to point B. I'm going to go from the ocean to the sand in this direct route and forget the waves. And it's like, well,
the waves determine.
You can do that, but it's going to take a long time and it's very painful. Yeah. Or you read the waves and you feel it and you glide in. And I look at this as what you're talking about, the safety and the spark, as that same thing. We can either ride the waves or we can ignore them and pretend they don't exist and be exacerbated and never surf again.
The reason why we develop these programs is because they work. At some point, they worked, right? It's a shorthand for, hey, if I'm going to go on a date, here's what I normally do. Here's where I normally take her. And here's how I would progress the conversation. And I know how that goes. But then after a period of time, it lacks of what you're talking about, that spark. For example, Amy Van Doran, who is a matchmaker in New York City. We interviewed her leading up to the event. And so she's been doing this for 10 years. She works with very high-end, successful men who don't have time to go out and find their own dates. They're not swiping. So she curates an environment of men and women who are operating at a high level. She's conducted 7,000 interviews over the past decade and is sitting on like a gold mine of research. And one of the biggest insights that she shared with us is that women are seeking a man who can make her feel alive. That's what she said. Those were her words. And that's why one of the big times that this theme came up. And she's like, if you think about how many dates, let's just say from a single person's perspective, how many dates a woman will go on in New York City to meet the man that she wants? those dates can feel very similar.
And we heard that from the women on stage at Discerning Dick.
No question.
Yeah.
They reinforce that. It's
Same.
okay, it's like, I've agreed to a date and the guy's now making dinner plans. We're going to the same restaurant. We're going to have a glass of wine to start. And you could be the most interesting dude, like whatever it is, most conversational dude. If you're starting a pattern the same way that she's been on like 1,000 other dates before, now we're having dessert and now maybe he's going to try and close me at the end of the night and kiss me to find out whatever. She's like, nothing stands out. It all blurs into the background. Mark Manson writes about this in his book, Models Attract Women Through Honesty. He's like, if there's 10,000 men in a town, what are you doing that makes you stand out, that makes you different? And if like you're constantly following whatever societal norms are, or you're running your old patterns because whatever, you're on autopilot and you're not
qualification program,
and you're not bringing your own spark, she's not going to feel it either. She's not. And so the other big insight that Amy gave, which was fascinating, I know you love this one, and the men in the room were like, holy shit, this one's big. She said that what makes you awesome at business makes you suck at dating. What makes you awesome at business makes you suck at dating. And I was like, Amy, tell me about that. By the way, the question I asked her that led to these insights, I was like, Amy, let's just say that a man went out on a date with one of your clients and he liked her and wanted to go out on another date, and like she said no. Why? Like, what are the reasons for that? And the first one she said was like, he didn't make her feel alive. And the second one was this business insight. And she's like, men who are really successful at business, she's working with some of the most successful ones, constantly are like in their head evaluating. There's like this checklist of things need to be knocked off before like they feel good about the business. They're always looking at the bad things, sniffing out, they're evaluating,
collecting data,
right. And doing algebra and calculus in their head. The woman is feeling that on the other side of the table, because like when the questions are being asked, if a guy actually even bothers asking questions, because many times like he'll just talk about his own accolades. If he's asking questions, she's like, it often feels like this machine gun style interview,
right?
Where she's just like, at the end of the dates, these guys will feel like, oh, okay, well maybe she checked my boxes, but she has felt no semblance of connection. And when he goes in for the kiss, she's like left wondering, how the hell did he think we got here?
So did I get the job?
Right. Like,
and guilty as charged, right? I mean, like, this is totally me. And here's how I wrap my head around. I thought I was doing a great job on dating when I was single, right? I thought by asking questions, I was being curious and wanting to know more. But in reality, when I look back at that, I was just qualifying. I was just like, do you fit what I think I want? And to a certain extent, that's okay. There's a time and place for that, but probably not before connecting.
Totally.
Before creating that spark.
Right on. And so we're sitting there evaluating, and she's like, the women come to the table looking for connection and a good time. And it's really hard to feel alive and connected when someone's just sitting there evaluating you. Right. And so that what makes you awesome at business makes you suck at dating. So one of the questions we talked about in the beginning, Brian, or actually more like a belief that some men have, is that when I get married and we have kids, that my wife's physiology just changes. She doesn't want sex as much anymore. And in talking to women, that's just not the truth. There are things that men are either doing or not doing inside the relationship that create a little bit of that distancing. So let me share a story with you about my friend Kim, who shared her personal story. Been married for 5 years, has a 4-year-old daughter. And what she said is that her husband has this expectation that because they're married and because he doesn't masturbate, she should be the one satisfying all of his sexual needs.
Sex on demand.
Sex on demand, yeah. It's become not like a method of connection for her. It feels like this obligation. It feels like pressure. This is not just relegated to him as a man, but one of the things we heard about in running the event was men tend to initiate sex 2 minutes before they want to have it. The foreplay is basically like instant.
Yeah, our turnaround time is amazing. We could be working in an Excel document and 2 minutes later be horny and be like, now's good.
Now,
let's do it.
Yeah. We're constantly looking for the shortest distance between two places. And what women have told us is that if you want that to happen, the method of seduction needs to take place much before that.
How much before that, Dom?
Constantly.
Okay.
Like you need to create a container of constant seduction. Now, this is where it can start to sound overwhelming and where it can sound like a big chore and a task, but hang with us here. Some of the women who shared that they've gone from one marriage where Kim's example was like their reality to another marriage or another relationship where their partner creates this constant state of seduction. It's actually not as hard as it may sound.
Yeah, because that guy immediately in my head sounds like I don't like him. I'm like, because he's like this suave guy running around doing like keeping the laundry warm, always having a coffee for her, doing a lot of work.
Like her servant.
Right? A servant is great.
Yeah.
Yes. That guy sounds like he doesn't have anything else better to do.
Yeah. And so a lot of the guys that we're talking to are like, my life is complicated enough as it is. And I would love to just be able to go home. Like, why do I have to work at this relationship thing? And we found out inevitably that you always do, just like anything else, right? But you made this great point before is there's a lot of inefficiency in the way that men are doing things right now. Think about how hard it is to step up time and time again to try and initiate sex with your wife or your partner, and she's not interested. And she shuts that down because she doesn't feel connection, she doesn't feel a safety, she doesn't feel a spark with you. That's inefficient.
Yeah. And the world I would love to live in is one in which we're both going after the same thing. It's not a give and a take. It's kind of a give sort of thing. And to your point, that's efficient. That feels good. It feels like there's less resistance at the very least.
Less resistance. Because some of the men who have shared with us, like, I've given up trying to initiate sex with my wife because like I can't take another shutdown. I can't take it.
And a lot of guys we talked to, they said, not only am I going to do that, but I'm going to go masturbate now instead. Like I'm going to find another alternative or find another relationship where I can get my sexual needs met. And that's the outlet. And so the good news is what some of these women told us, I know we're going to dive into, is here's how you can do it in the relationship, reducing resistance and getting what we all want.
Totally. I mean, the feelings that, let's just say, that women have had, so it's basically the other side of the story that we've gotten from women about, here's why we're saying no, is that I feel unsafe because I've put this boundary up. He's constantly trying to knock the boundary down.
And Dominic, not unsafe in like, I feel physically abused or unsafe in like the classic sense.
Yeah,
it's emotional. It's right.
I feel pressure. Now I'm stressed out because I'm caring for a child. I'm maybe working also. I've got all these other responsibilities and demands. And now this another responsibility and demand is sex. And as soon as like we tip sex over into that category of demand or an obligation or responsibility, you've lost sight of the purpose of that, which is supposed to be a connection. One of the women in our group who said, when a man brings an agenda, he's got some sort of agenda to any kind of engagement, or we can smell that as women a mile away. We can sniff out his agenda. And what you and I have talked about is we always have agendas. We're always going to have an agenda. It's just a matter of, is your agenda completely self-serving or is your agenda in service of your relationship? And when we've heard men talk about not having as much sex as they've wanted, it's typically inadvertently a self-serving perspective that they're coming from. They're like, I want sex. She has this thing that she won't give to me. How do I get her to give it to me? Versus what's
the hacks? What's the hacks to get what I want?
Yeah, right. Like if I rub her feet, will that turn her on enough? And how fast can I get there?
If you squeeze her nose and rub her feet at the same time, it happens every time. Right. Don't do that.
Yeah. Like what flower bouquet can I buy her?
Right.
What meal can I take her to that will just get me there faster? And what we're finding is like, if that is the thing that you're focused on, then it is a self-serving agenda that doesn't make her feel safe because like you're not connecting with her. And there's an absence of a spark because like you're banging your head up against the wall, initiating the same way you've always initiated. And maybe that worked for the first few years of your relationship, but that thing has died out. It's like playing the same song. As much as you've loved that song or watched the same movie, as much as you might have loved it, if you're watching it every single day, it gets old. You need a new spark. Here's how we do that. Here's 4 different ways that we can create the safety and a spark. And we're going to be drawing upon a lot of the wisdom that we learned from one of the women that we invited to speak on our stage that really blew our audience away. Her name is Lauren Baptiste. She runs an event series in New York for women who are in professional settings called Fierce Femme. So she's working with like a lot of women who are high octane in their businesses, who are constantly in stressful situations, who are depleted in many different ways. And she shared with us some real key concepts that help us to create that safety and a spark.
The number one thing I took, Dominic, from the Discerning Dick event was one fact. And that is that we as humans have both sex hormones and stress hormones. Now, that wasn't the shock to me. The shock to me was the relationship between the two. Yep. And what Lauren was able to explain to us is that when our stress hormones are high, our sex hormones are low. and the wanting to have sex, especially from the female perspective, is less.
Yeah.
And so it goes to make sense that if we create an environment in which there's more stress, we're going to get less sex.
This is obviously different for me because I've shared with you many times that like my stress levels were directly proportional, or actually it influenced how much of a sex drive I had. That was one of the key contributors in my sex addiction. Was every time I would get stressed out, I would go to porn, I would go to masturbate, I would go to find someone who would want to sleep with me because like I had all this energy that I didn't know how to harness. And so I naturally would assume that like women would respond the same way. And she was like, no, it's the opposite. If a woman is chronically stressed out, and she's talking about women who are, say, professional, working there, maybe not just working, but also a wife and also children. There are lots of responsibilities. And if there's this chronic state of stress, then it can reduce the desire to have sex. And the example was cortisol she talked about. And like something as simple as like your cell phone can create enhanced level of cortisol in your system. For example, Anderson Cooper did a 60 Minutes case study where he went into a biometric testing facility, was all hooked up to all these heart rate, whatever. And they played a trick on him. They put his like phone just far enough away from him that he couldn't reach it. But he had to watch like every phone call that came through, every notification that popped up. It's almost like a lightened version of waterboarding in our modern day society. And they asked Anderson, they're like, what are you feeling as you're seeing this pop up? And he goes, nothing. I see my phone pop up all day long. But the biometric readouts were telling an entirely different story. Every single time his phone rang or flashed or buzzed or notified, cortisol was released in his system. And cortisol is a necessary stress hormone that gets you going when you get out of bed in the morning. It's go time. It's like that. Hey, it's time to focus. But in a chronic state of cortisol release, it can lead to things like inflammation and weight gain and memory loss and like, in super chronic states of this. And so what she's saying is there are so many of those environmental elements that could be contributing to your woman, your partner, not desiring sex. And so if you can become, this is the tip number one, a magician at reducing the stress that your wife or your woman or your partner is experiencing, then you will be basically tilling the soil, more fertile soil, to plant the seeds of seduction that will sprout later.
And there's great ways to do that where we can both reduce stress and both create those environments.
That leads actually to number two, which is this creating the environments. Number two, about how to create more safety and how to create a spark, is creating environments, these constant states of seduction. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that we got from women was those environments oftentimes need to have nothing to do with sex. The examples that we were given was, man, 2 minutes before he wants to initiate sex, like he will grab a boob and be like, are you ready to do this, honey? And what women were telling us was, get to know what it is that we like. Get to know some of the things that we're dealing with. And for example, let's say my wife has a stressful presentation the next day that you know that she's stressed out about, maybe waking up like 5 minutes earlier, making her favorite coffee or running out and grabbing it and just saying, honey, there's a lot on your mind. I just want to do this one thing for you to show you that I'm here in support of you. When you start to do a lot of those little things, what women have shared with us is that it creates a network effect. It creates a tipping point where at some point she's just like, this guy is so attuned to what's going on in my life that I feel close to him. I feel safe around him. He's caring for me. And also, like, if you haven't done this before, it does create a spark because you're stepping up in a way that she hasn't seen. And maybe she's like, wow, I learned something new about you. What else is in there?
Which is interesting.
That I don't know about.
Alive and spark. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the things we hear from partners quite a bit is, I know him or I know her. I've been married for a while. I know everything about. Not true, man.
Right, so we're creating beautiful surprise moments. And it's a surprise not because it's aha. It's surprise because it's not something that was specifically asked for. It was something that we as guys intuited through a series of experiences and can say like, oh, like this guy is like thinking about me, caring about me, even when I don't know that he is.
Correct.
And that starts to create that allure and that environment that feels special.
It's a great word, the allure. One of my good friends, Nick, took his wife on a trip through Europe where she had no idea where they were going. So it was like, hey, honey, pack a bag for 10 days. And it needs to be for this weather environment. And I'll take care of your passport. But we're showing up at the airport tomorrow night at this time. She had this amazing, seductive experience of never knowing Are we spending 3 days in Rome? Are we spending 2 days in Paris? And he just took her and it unfolded for her in a way where she was like, I can't believe that he did all this for me. Yeah. Now that's a grand gesture, right? And we're not talking about that it needs to be, but you need to understand that there's a scale of different things and environments that you can create where there's mystery, excitement, allure. Yeah, women are looking for that.
Yeah, and also feedback I got one time is back in grade school, we would do math tests, right? And you could come up with the answer, but the teacher would always say, show your work.
All right.
Like, show your work. If you did, how did you get there? Right. And so oftentimes explaining to our women of how we got there and the thought that went behind it as opposed to just doing it is also helpful. And we can do that in the smallest of circumstances.
Yeah.
So
I think the reason why teachers say show your work is because they want to know you didn't cheat, right? Like they wanted to know that like you actually understood the thing. And so showing your work in this case is also kind of a reveal of, wow, like he did actually put time, effort, and thought and energy into this. And one really important thing to point out here is if you are doing something, if you're taking on any of these ideas simply as a shortcut to you getting more sex, if you're like, I'm only doing this stuff so that I can get laid, she's going to feel that. And it's one of those things where you have to be committed to something bigger and beyond that. And maybe I'm kind of overstepping our bounds into our idea of number 4. We'll get there in a second. But you have to commit to this because it's for your relationship, not just for you to get a hack to getting more sex that you want. All right, number 3, engaging in the things that most men would avoid or run away from. The perfect example, and Lauren, we have an audio clip for you that you're going to listen to, shares the brilliance in understanding your partner's menstrual cycle. Now, for most dudes see like the menstrual cycle as an enemy to them getting sex that they want. Oh, she's either PMSing, she's crazy, I don't want to go near her, I'm going to avoid. And other guys will laugh at that and say, yeah, I know the same thing. And so like you never actually get close to that or understanding the cycle. Or she's having her period and maybe she doesn't want to have sex with you, or maybe you don't want to have sex during her period. And it's just like, okay, I'll see you in a week. In all of those cases, one of the things that women have shared with us is that you are rejecting one of the central core tenets of a woman's experience. You're actually looking at it as it's gross, or you're looking at it as if it's like an enemy to you getting what you want.
Yeah, exactly. And because it could be confusing for guys because also, it changes often, right? There's 4 cycles that she'll go through in a given month. And it's like, well, why is my woman like this on this Wednesday and a week later she feels like a completely different woman? Like what's going on?
Yeah, because she is a completely different woman.
Right. Biologically.
Yes.
Literally. Hormonally. What was fascinating to hear from Lauren is like how we can navigate that as a guy instead of just throwing our hands up and saying this doesn't make any sense.
Right. And coming back when she's back to earth or whatever it is. So listen very closely because what she does is she breaks down the cycle into like day-long segments and then what you can expect from her. And then she gives a brilliant prescription that you as a man can do during that time to really meet your woman so she feels safe, cared for, and there's inevitably a spark at the end of that when you have like this fluency in her menstrual cycle. So here's Lauren.
So sealing the deal is starting to link what's happening with her cycle. It's not just, okay, she's bleeding, I'll see you in a week, or she's premenstrual, like call me later. But it's starting to understand, okay, 4 phases, there's something going on mentally that she's asking for, and then there's something physically that she's asking for. So let's go through this really quickly just to kind of seal the deal. So starting with the phase, that spring phase where it's post, the day after bleeding, emotionally, she wants to talk about herself. She's really in an idea state. I have this idea. I want to do this thing. Let's go on a trip together. She wants to share. Guys, listen to that.
So just ride it out for the next 6 days.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
7 to 10, but it's 7 to 10. And then physically, this is a time where she's into like funky stuff. So if you haven't tried something before, if you want to role play or do something new, this is that opportunity to try something different. She's not going to want that throughout the entire cycle. This will be the time. So again, be strategic. If there's an agenda where you want to role play, wait until this moment.
Cool. That's great.
Second phase. So this is the ovulatory phase. Think about it again. If we're not in survival mode, we're in procreating mode. So this is when the woman is like hot, in heat. You know what we say about animals? We're animals too. So it's in that moment, like she wants to have sex. She wants it now. This is where sexually a quickie works, right? So I think guys are like into quickies and like, yeah, awesome. And then like a week later, like, what happened? Like, why did it change? That's your time for like your quickie, you're really hot, you're physical, your passionate sex is like then. Emotionally, it's the time where she actually wants to hear from you. So it's like, tell me what you want in bed or not. But it's like, whatever that can be, but she wants to hear what he has to say. So then there's that other side. Only 3 to 5 days, but again, we'll take it.
Working with that. Yeah.
How much is there to share? No, it's awesome. Third phase is now the PMS phase. So this is where everybody's kind of like, oh, like I know that time of the month. Mentally, this is where she's shifting from kind of go-getter phase to internal phase. So she's kind of going outward in. So now instead of being really physical, she's starting to kind of like close off on certain things. She's trying to finish to-do lists. So in terms of relationship, it's like, how can I help you? Doing chores at this time would be really good for guys. Take out the garbage, do it at that time, especially. And also romance her. And it's like, even if you're not talking sexually, little hobby or little habits like that can really start to engage a woman in those little things that we talked about. It doesn't have to just be for the win, but it can be like really being in a relationship and understanding what her needs are at that time.
Awesome. And stage 4?
Stage 4, last phase, is ask her what she wants. When she's bleeding, she's either going to want comfort because maybe her cramps suck, or maybe she wants some space. It's in a time where she's internal and she wants to be reflective. It's in the brain. It's the first time really, and the main time where the left and right hemispheres of the brain are connecting very strongly. So at that point, she's kind of doing some inner work. So at that point, you might say, hey, what are you feeling? You want tonight by yourself, or maybe I'll come over and we can, Netflix and chill, whatever. And also physically, literally whatever. Physically, period sex, right? This is like such a thing, right? Where some people love it, some people hate it. I would say, especially from the man, ask the woman if she likes it. Don't force it. There are women, it's like, I think it's black or white. They're either into it or they're not. So then if they're into it, drop a towel and make it happen, because it can really help with her cramps and it can make her feel better and it helps her feel sexy in a time that's not sexy, right? But if she wants that space, it's going to be like Leah mentioned with like doors shutting, not interested, like it's kind of like it feels embarrassing. So it needs to be this conversation. So like if you're ready to take your relationship there, have that conversation and go from there.
Damn, that's gold. That's great. Okay, so the quick recap, make sure I got this right. The days after, day 1 after the bleeding, it's basically, that's the time for adventure. That's the time where she wants to express herself. So be curious, ask a lot of questions. The 3 to 5 days after that is where like the heat comes on. This is where like sex is at a high, maybe your quickies, and also she wants to hear from you. And then after that, it's the PMS stage, where it's basically like acts of service seem to be the thing that kind of, take out the trash or like do the things that, maybe would be acts of service that she could appreciate.
In the bedroom too, right?
And
Both
acts
sides.
of service in the bedroom, right? And then during the actual cycle itself, it's like having that conversation first to find out, is your partner into that or not? And getting curious about what she may need at that particular time, because that may change from cycle to cycle, presumably. Like she may want closeness in one, she may want distance in another. Is that a fairly quick, good recap of what you just said?
Absolutely, yeah, it's awesome.
Brian, that was just pure gold. I remember after the event, the men in the room came up, they're like mind blown. Now I have like a framework for understanding. I actually feel like I do understand, but I also know how I can support my partner and also start to create some seductive moments.
There's a method to the madness.
Finally, there's a method to the madness.
Before it was just shooting in the dark and like, I don't know, maybe I should take out the garbage today, or maybe today's a good time to explore different types of sex. But it turns out that there's specific times, which is amazing.
And there's an app for this too, right?
There's many apps for it. One of them is called Clue. The woman puts in when she starts bleeding and some other life events, and it'll start to predict out when those phases actually happen. So I literally can pull up the app and take a look and see where she's at.
And one of the pieces of counseling that Lauren gave us about the app is that it may be too intimate for a woman at first. So you have the conversation with your partner. Do not force this or thrust the, hey, I need to know when you're bleeding and I need to know these cycles.
This is not a first date conversation.
Yeah, don't bring that to your first date.
Right.
It is something to be aware of. if you want to drive deeper intimacy into your relationship.
And Dominic, the other thing that really struck me with this is the belief that we've heard from a lot of guys is that the woman is the gatekeeper to sex. And I need to get around the gate or convince her specifically to have sex with me, whether that's in a relationship or whether that's while being single. So what struck me in this is that it's not the woman. She's not the enemy here, right?
That's right.
It's these hormones and understanding how to navigate that flow of hormones.
Yeah.
And when I look at it that way, I'm like, oh, it's not her. She actually wants to engage and have sex and feel connected and feel that spark and feel safety. That's great. She's not the enemy. It's these hormones and understanding what they are, how they are, the purpose that they serve, and how I can play with them.
Stress is the enemy. It's not her. And if you could start to like depersonalize that and say she wants to come to the table with the assumption that like she's dying for connection. She's dying to be seduced. She's looking for feelings of safety emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all these things. And if you can figure out what's standing in the way of that, and we've given you some clues here, right? Stress being the big one, then you can start to resolve the stress, not resolve her, right? The last one, and you've heard us use this term quite a bit, is understanding when you are coming to the table with your self-serving agenda. So you have to understand when you have an agenda, if it's self-serving or if it's actually serving your relationship. And I know that you went through a couples counseling session where you were given like a really precise way of understanding when you're doing it just for you and when the agenda is actually something bigger.
Right. It can be confusing. So I want sex, therefore am I not supposed to want sex anymore? And therefore it's something else. And the shift that he helped me think through was, am I doing this for me? Is the sex about me and me alone? Or is the action and the activity, and let's call it maybe instead of just wanting sex, let's say that I want to reduce stress and that my woman wants a foot rub. Right? Am I doing that foot rub to get sex for me? Right? That's self-serving. I still want sex, but it's self-serving.
So if you're doing that foot rub begrudgingly, what we're saying is there's an intention that it will spark desire in the other person. But if you're doing it and you don't want to really be doing it, because you think it's just going to get you like a hack towards sex, she's going to feel that.
Right.
And that's going to blow up in your face because like she can't trust that.
And if you're doing it to create the environment, to reduce her stress, and the words that this counselor used was to provide an offering to us as a connected party. As opposed to doing it as a hack to get what I want. Right?
Very big difference.
Very different things. Now, the action on the surface feels the same. I'm giving a foot rub. I think I might even get sex. But the way and the intention with which we go about doing it is to create this environment. And maybe sex is 2 days down the road. Not just 2 minutes down the road. And that's okay. And just the fact that I know my partner is going to feel less stress, the fact that I'm giving something, which, by the way, that also feels great. That creates that right environment. And that's the right intention. That's the us, that's the offering versus the self-serving, tit-for-tat, transactional world that a lot of us live in.
Totally. And what I love about all this, Brian, is that this is all entirely within our control. For any man who's listening, like everything that we've just given you, your partner does not have to do anything differently. You are the one who controls all of these about becoming a magician at reducing stress. That's number one. To number two, creating those environments where she feels like she's in a constant state of seduction. So doing things that maybe arouse her sexually, but also other acts of service that have nothing to do with sex or an expectation of sexual return. Number three, engaging in those experiences, those feminine things that like most men will avoid.
Engage in that flow.
Engage in the flow. Get the app. And the fourth one, which is creating agendas that serve us versus just you. All of that is within your control. And what we found, your partner will naturally start to respond to changes and shifts that you have entirely within your power versus expecting them to change and do what you want them to do because like you have some sort of...
And you will feel like a magician when it happens because you'll know, right? You're being conscious in this and you know it's happening. And when it happens, you're going to have this... Hell
yeah. I'm mad. So why don't we close out on a quote that we read in the beginning because I think it is powerful to hear a second time from Kelly. When a man has no expectation of an outcome to our sexual encounters, I feel safe to relax into the moment. And when he takes his time to explore and learn how to get me into full turn-on mode, I feel safe to surrender my being to him and to the pleasure. This type of conscious connection makes me feel on top of the fucking world, and I would probably do most anything for that conscious, badass man. Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.